My friends, you won't believe what happened. I decided to dive headfirst into India's most controversial street food, and I almost ended up in the hospital. Out there in the alleys, under the scorching heat, I ate dishes that seemed like pure joy until my body started giving dramatic signals. If you think street food is all about flavor and adventure, just wait until you see this disaster and why it became one of the greatest lessons of my life as a traveler. And you, who love curiosities like me, don't forget, hit the like button, subscribe here on the channel, and like this video. Because what's coming next is pure culture shock and a health warning. The irresistible allure of street food in India. Why is Indian street food so appealing? India has a monumental tradition of street food, samosas, pani puri, chaat, aromas, colors, and flavors that transform every corner into a festival. For those who travel with their senses open, it's impossible to resist. When I arrived in Delhi, I felt the call of the vendors from the very first minute. The sound of frying pans, the steam of broths, and that smell of spices drew me in like a magnet. But behind this charm, there's a risk that not every tourist realizes. The diversity of dishes and the culture behind them. Street food in India is anything but monotonous. Each region has its iconic delicacies. In the north, you'll find kachoris and aloo tikki. In the south, idlis and dosas. This variety is part of the charm. It's not just about eating, it's about experiencing the culture in motion. Talking to some vendors, I realized that many dishes are passed down through generations, and the recipe you eat on the sidewalk might have centuries of history. For me, each bite was a cultural immersion, but also a gamble. The invisible risks. What is not seen at first glance. Despite their attractive appearance and delicious taste, many food carts are located in unsanitary areas. There are stalls near garbage dumps, open sewers, and water that isn't always potable. Furthermore, exposed ingredients and poorly washed utensils increase the risk of contamination. Lack of proper refrigeration is another problem, especially with dishes that use vegetables or dairy products. This is the kind of danger you don't notice until it's too late. Why do many tourists ignore these risks? For many travelers, the adrenaline rush is part of the experience. Eating something exotic on the street is like tasting the world. Some people think, if so many locals eat it, why couldn't I? From the outside, some forum commentators argue that black, dirty food might seem scary, but if it's very hot, it increases the risk of bacterial death. Example. The only time I got sick was from a fast food chain, not from street food. Furthermore, many use the criterion of queues. If there are many people eating at that cart, it must be safe, right? The moment when adventure turned into nightmare. My first serious risk jump. On my second day in India, I was excited. I'd seen a popular stall full of locals and decided to risk trying a dish called kachori. It looked so innocent. Fried dough, filling, and a sauce that glistened in the sun. I sat there, breathing in the mixture of food smoke and street noise, thinking I was experiencing the true essence of India. But looking back, it was perhaps the most dangerous decision I made during the entire trip. My body's first reactions. A few hours after eating, my stomach started to rumble. A mild pain that quickly turned into severe cramps. At first, I thought it was just the effect of eating too much or something heavy. But I was wrong. I started sweating profusely, felt dizzy, and my energy vanished. It was as if my body was warning me. Something wasn't right. And the worst part is that I was far from a familiar hospital, in a country where my language is barely good enough to ask for water. The rush to the hospital, and the real scare. It didn't take long for me to decide I needed help. A tuk-tuk took me to the nearest hospital, and in no time I was in bed with doctors assessing my condition. That risky check became a reality. At the hospital, they told me that the food I ate had a high chance of being contaminated, and that my dehydration was severe. It was the worst feeling. The adrenaline of the adventure turned into fear and regret, the warning that marked me forever. While I was recovering, it became clear to me it's not enough to just want to try everything. There are real consequences. I also realized that many other tourists disregard warnings about contaminated water, dirty utensils, or poorly stored ingredients. And even among locals, there is inequality. Many vendors lack the infrastructure to maintain hygiene standards. Lessons, advice, and the other side of the coin. How to identify a safer tent. After that experience, I learned a few tricks to minimize risks when I want to eat street food again. First, observe where the vendor gets the water, whether they have a clean jug or use tap water. Second, check if the utensils are clean or if they are piled up haphazardly. Third, prefer dishes that are cooked fresh and at high temperatures. This kills many germs. I also started to stick to places that are more crowded with locals, not just those that seem touristy. When is it worth taking the risk and when is it better to avoid it? Not all street food is an imminent danger, and not all risks are the same. Depending on the city, neighborhood, or region you're visiting, you can find relatively safe stalls. But there are times when the risk isn't worth it. If the place is makeshift, lacks infrastructure, or is too noisy and dirty, it might be better to skip it. Your health is a high price to pay for a cool TikTok photo. The invisible risks beyond immediate poisoning. It's not just food poisoning that's a concern. Open trays, unhygienic hands, contaminated water, and even the reuse of oil are common practices in some places. And these factors can cause not only diarrhea, but more serious illnesses such as E. coli, salmonella, or other intestinal infections. There are also chronic issues. Frequent consumption of heavily fried, salty, or repeatedly oiled foods can affect long-term health. My conclusion and invitation to reflection for the audience. Trying Indian street food is magical, but that magic comes at a cost. The experience taught me that balance is key. Curiosity, yes, but with respect and prudence. My advice to those watching: if you're going to travel, research, observe, ask the locals, and don't feel obligated to eat everything just to live the adventure. And to you who are here now, if you enjoyed this sincere account, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss any more videos of curiosities like this one, and leave a like, because the next story is coming with even more culture shock. The cultural clash behind each dish. Behind the scenes of street food, what tourists don't see. The truth is that while tourists only see the finished dish, there's a whole process behind Indian street food that's rarely shown. Many vendors start working before sunrise, preparing ingredients in makeshift conditions. The smell of spices in the morning mixes with the sounds of the city waking up. But alongside this, there's also a lack of adequate infrastructure. It's a fascinating world, but full of contrasts. Walking through the still empty alleys, I noticed that many foods are displayed on tables without refrigeration. For those accustomed to hygienic markets, this is an immediate shock. Even so, the vendors work with pride and dedication, believing that their recipes represent their identity. The contrast between tradition and modernity is visible, and this forms an impressive but also risky cultural landscape. The high heat of the pots, the crackling oil, and the shouts of the vendors are part of a daily spectacle. The energy of the environment mesmerizes any visitor. But one thing few people realize is that the water used often comes from untreated communal taps. This can compromise even seemingly simple dishes. The beauty of the food exists, but so does the risk. While talking to some vendors, I discovered that many learn the trade from childhood. They grow up within this routine and rarely receive sanitary training. For them, that method of preparation is natural and part of family tradition. This shows how the perception of hygiene is cultural. But for tourists, this difference can be dangerous. In the end, I understood that Indian street food is a mixture of history, human effort, and improvisation. But it also has unseen challenges that need to be understood. Each dish carries centuries of meaning, but also difficult conditions. It's an experience that both delights and alerts at the same time. And that explains a lot about what happened to me. The courage, or recklessness, to try the unknown. Traveling involves a certain degree of courage, but we often confuse courage with recklessness. When I decided to try some more daring dishes, I felt that typical adventurer's adrenaline rush. The truth is, I wanted to experience everything intensely. But there's a fine line between adventure and carelessness. And on that particular day, I crossed that line without realizing it. The stroller I chose seemed popular, and that gave me a false sense of security. The vendor was smiling, it smelled good, and the lively queue convinced me I was in an authentic place. But authenticity doesn't always mean safety. I got carried away by the moment, ignoring simple details that should have raised red flags. But the desire to try it out won out. When I took the first bite, I felt that impact of intense flavors. India really knows how to transform spices into sensory explosions. But deep down, something seemed different. The oil had a strange taste, as if it had been used countless times before. The texture of the dish wasn't the best either. I should have stopped right there, but I kept eating. Part of me thought, everyone here is eating, it must be safe. And that's a very common mistake among tourists. The immunity of the locals is completely different from ours. What is common for them can be devastating for us. Food isn't just about taste, it's biology, it's adaptation, it's context. And I completely ignored that. Today I see that the problem wasn't trying street food, but doing so without knowledge. It's not about stopping exploring the world, but about being aware of the risks. Adventure remains part of the experience, but now with more responsibility. I learned the hard way, but I learned the street environment and its hidden dangers. The streets of India are a stunning visual spectacle. Colors, smells, music, movement. It's easy to be mesmerized by this energy. But this same vibrant environment hides details that can compromise your health. The intense heat, for example, accelerates food spoilage, and with the amount of dust and pollution, everything becomes even more critical. Many food carts are parked alongside busy avenues. The wind carries particles of dirt directly onto the exposed dishes. It may not seem like much at the moment, but this creates an environment conducive to contamination. Despite all the chaotic beauty of the street, there is a darker side that can only be seen by looking closely, and I only realized it after feeling ill. Another worrying factor is the presence of animals near the stalls. Dogs, cows, and even monkeys roam freely. And where there are animals, there are bacteria. This seems trivial when you're excited to try different flavors, but it's a real risk. The food may look delicious, but it could be exposed to variables we can't see. Furthermore, the condition of the pots and utensils themselves can be poor. Some are old, burnt, with stuck-on residue. Others are washed only with running water, which is not always potable. For the vendors, this is part of the routine. For a tourist, it can be the beginning of a major health problem. Only after my experience in the hospital did I realize how everything was connected. The heat, the animals, the water, the open environment. The food was just the surface of the issue. The environment around it explained what really happened to me. And that realization completely changed my relationship with street food. The line between tradition and risk. Street food is a cultural heritage in India. It represents the history, beliefs, and culinary identity of millions of people. But this tradition coexists with socio-economic difficulties that directly impact food security. Many vendors depend exclusively on that cart to support their families. Therefore, they adapt as best they can, even without adequate resources. When refrigeration is unavailable, they use manual methods. When water is scarce, they improvise. And when traffic increases, they prioritize speed over hygiene. Not because they want to do things wrong, but because they have no alternative. This creates an environment where tradition and risk intertwine, and understanding this is essential for any traveler. What's most impressive is that, even with the challenges, the vendors demonstrate enormous dedication. The food is made with care, effort, and history. Many of them are proud of their secret recipes, kept for decades. But this doesn't eliminate the sanitary problems. The cultural beauty doesn't neutralize the danger. This contrast is what makes Indian street food so fascinating and yet so complex. It reveals the best and worst of local reality. It showcases innovation amidst a lack of infrastructure. It reveals flavor amidst improvisation. And it reveals tradition amidst risk. It's a profound experience and demands caution. In the end, this coexistence of culture and danger made me see India in a more human way, not as an exotic setting, but as a reality full of nuances. and that made my journey even more remarkable. Part of the learning process was understanding that not everything that is traditional is safe, and that balance is necessary. Enjoy life without harming yourself. The physical and emotional impact of intoxication. The beginning of the physical fall. Food poisoning doesn't start with a bang. It comes on silently, like a subtle warning that many ignore. In the first few minutes, I felt only a slight discomfort, something that seemed like an effect of the intense heat. It didn't seem serious, but my body was about to collapse, and I had no idea what was coming next. The sensation quickly escalated into nausea, as if my stomach were rejecting everything. Cold sweat began to trickle down my face, even though I hadn't exerted myself at all. My heart raced, as if I were running. With each passing minute, the feeling of being out of control intensified. It was the beginning of an internal storm. When I realized I couldn't keep walking, I sat down on the sidewalk. The vibrant Indian street seemed to spin around me. The smell of fried food, once delicious, now seemed unbearable. My vision began to blur, and I felt my legs weaken. There, alone and far from home, fear began to creep in. It wasn't just physical. Emotionally, I panicked. The thought that kept hammering away was simple and terrifying. I'm not going to make it to the hospital. Traveling is incredible, but when something goes wrong, you feel vulnerable. The adrenaline of the adventure turned into real fear, and I was in the worst possible place to faint. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't respond properly. Everything felt heavy, as if I were carrying the world on my shoulders. The sweat, the dizziness, the nausea, it all came at once. It was then that I realized this wasn't just a reaction. I was really unwell, and I needed urgent help. The struggle to get medical care. Finding a hospital in a foreign country isn't as simple as it seems. I needed to explain what I was feeling, but I could barely speak. Trusting strangers became my only option. I waved to a tuk-tuk driver who noticed my condition and helped me without hesitation. The journey was tense. Every turn seemed to make everything worse. During the ride, I felt waves of heat and cold alternating throughout my body. My head ached as if it were being pressed from the inside. The driver, noticing my fragility, accelerated more than usual. The city seemed endless. The noise of the cars was too loud, and all I could think was, "Hold on tight, we're almost there." Upon arriving at the hospital, I needed help getting out of the tuk-tuk. My steps were unsteady, as if I were walking on clouds. The medical team quickly placed me on a stretcher. While they checked my vital signs, I could barely understand what they were saying. Everything seemed distant, as if I were in another world. They gave me an IV drip immediately. The feeling of relief was almost instantaneous. It was as if my body was begging for hydration. The doctors said the dehydration was advanced, one of the classic signs of severe food poisoning. I didn't know it could happen so quickly. Now it was clear. It was there, hooked up to tubes and surrounded by strangers, that it all hit me. I, who only wanted to experience the local culture, almost ended up in a much worse situation. The emotional shock was intense, and at the same time, an enormous gratitude arose. For the doctors, for the driver, for having arrived in time. The adventure had turned into a lesson, the psychological weight of the experience. After stabilizing, the body begins to recover, but the mind doesn't keep up at the same pace. I kept mentally replaying every decision I had made that day. I wondered where exactly I had gone wrong. Was it the tent? The water used? The old oil? This constant doubt creates an emotional weight that's hard to ignore. Traveling has always brought me joy, but at that moment, I felt immense anxiety. The fear of eating anything returned with force. Even simple foods seemed threatening. My brain associated any strong smell with what had happened. It was as if my body had created an involuntary defense against danger. Loneliness also weighed heavily. Even surrounded by people, I was far from home, without family nearby. This kind of vulnerability affects you. You realize how much you depend on your own health to live incredible experiences. Without it, everything loses meaning. And this realization marked me deeply. I started questioning my choices, not just on that trip, but as a tourist in general. Am I being too reckless? Am I pushing my luck to the limit? This reflection is inevitable when the body fails. The mind tries to understand, justify, find explanations, and this creates a spiral that's difficult to control in the first few days. Over time, I realized that certain scares serve to bring us back to our senses. The intoxication taught me to respect my limits. Adventure remains a part of who I am, but now there's a new voice inside me, one that calls for caution. And that voice is important. It prevents curiosity from turning into danger. Recovery, a slow and revealing process. The body takes time to return to its normal rhythm. In the days following the food poisoning, even a small meal felt like a challenge. I ate slowly, almost as if I were relearning how to eat. My body was sensitive, and that forced me to listen to my body in a way I never had before. The weakness persisted. Walking long distances, something I always do when traveling, became exhausting. The country's heat seemed even more intense. Every movement required effort. I stayed in a simple hotel, avoiding unnecessary outings. It was frustrating to see the vibrant city outside while I needed to rest. But this period of rest brought about profound reflection. I began to pay attention to the details of the culture that I had previously ignored in the rush of daily life. I watched vendors setting up their carts through the window. I observed entire families working together. It was like watching a living documentary of the local routine. Even without going out, I learned a lot. Each day, my confidence in my body returned a little more. I started consuming liquids, then soups, and finally more solid foods. The recovery wasn't linear. Some days were better than others, but progress was happening, and that progress made me value something simple: health. When I finally managed to go out for a walk again, I felt a mixture of relief and respect for the place. India is fascinating, but it demands attention. And that episode transformed me deeply, not only as a traveler, but as a person. I came out of that experience more aware and much more prepared. The rebirth of the more conscious traveler, back on the streets with a different mindset. After recovering, I had to face a specific fear, returning to the Indian streets. The smells, once inviting, now triggered memories of the incident. But I knew I needed to experience the city again, this time with more caution. The trip couldn't end in trauma. It needed to end in learning. I walked slowly, observing everything with heightened attention. I noticed details that had previously gone unnoticed. The way the vendors handled the ingredients, the proximity of the stalls to the traffic, the water being used to wash utensils. Every detail mattered. And this time, I was seeing everything clearly. I decided not to eat anything on that first day back. I just wanted to observe, analyze, understand the environment. India is an intense country, and absorbing its energy without rushing was liberating. I felt enormous respect for the culture, the history, and the cuisine. But now, with a new awareness, one thing became very clear. Street food is an essential part of local life, but it doesn't have to be part of my experience at all costs. Traveling is about choosing what to see, where to step, what to eat, and I learned to choose better. The emotion remains, it just changed form. When I finally felt ready to try something again, I was extremely careful. I asked about the water, checked the condition of the cart, and looked for places recommended by locals. It wasn't fear, it was maturity. And for the first time, I felt I was traveling wisely. Respect for local culture and reality. The poisoning made me see India in a more human way. Before, I saw the country as a great adventure. Afterwards, I began to see it as a complex reality, full of contrasts. I realized that the vendors do the best they can with the resources they have, and that completely changed my perspective. Understanding the social challenges has given me more empathy. Many depend exclusively on that work, without government support or adequate infrastructure. Yet they get up early, work hard, and offer the best they can. Food is not just commerce, it's survival. This brings a new meaning to everything. This awareness also made me more responsible as a tourist. I can't demand standards that the local reality doesn't allow, but I can choose what to consume and how to behave. I can support vendors who work in a more organized way. I can learn from the culture without putting myself in danger. This also transformed the way I tell stories. What happened ceased to be just a story about food. It became about people, about life, about inequality and tradition. India is a giant country, full of contrasts, and each dish carries a bit of that complexity. Today, I understand that better. Traveling isn't just about seeing beautiful places, it's about understanding what lies behind them. And this trip, despite the scares, gave me an insight I never would have gained otherwise. Street food is fascinating, yes, but it's also a portrait of a reality that deserves to be seen with respect and sensitivity, awareness that transforms future travelers. After what I experienced, I felt I needed to share this learning not to scare people, but to prepare them. Many tourists make the same mistakes I did out of excitement or lack of information. The idea isn't to avoid street food, but to know when it's safe. Traveling prepared means traveling with freedom. I started talking to other tourists I met along the way. It was impressive how many had already experienced similar situations. Some had mild food poisoning, others more severe. Most admitted they didn't know how to assess the hygiene of the beach tents. This pattern repeats itself around the world, out of sheer ignorance. That's why sharing my story has become almost a mission. Every detail, every scare, every lesson learned can help someone avoid the same problem. It's not drama, it's awareness. And the more we talk about it, the more careful people become. Information saves trips, and sometimes it saves days in the hospital. I also noticed that many locals are happy to guide tourists. You just have to ask respectfully. They explain which stalls are more reliable, which dishes are riskier, and even where the water is safer. Sometimes all we need is the humility to ask for help, and that help makes a real difference. The incident that almost ruined my trip ended up bringing me closer to people. It created unexpected connections, it led to deep conversations, and it made me see that traveling is an exchange. You receive experiences, but you also give back knowledge, and that knowledge can prevent others from repeating your mistakes. The emotional closure of the cycle. At the end of the trip, I realized that the scare had turned into something bigger than a health problem. It was a milestone, a turning point in how I see the world, food, and my own choices. What seemed like a disaster became a profound process of maturation. India remained vibrant and beautiful to me, but now with an extra layer of meaning. I learned to appreciate every detail, from the way the dishes are prepared to the living conditions of the vendors. Everything has context, and that context is essential to truly understanding the country. In my suitcase, besides the memories, I also carried this reflection, an intense story, full of layers, which I share today not to push anyone away, but to illuminate paths. The adventure continues to be part of the journey, but now accompanied by responsibility and knowledge. Upon returning home, I realized that my relationship with food and culture had changed forever. I hadn't stopped trying new things. I had simply learned to observe the invisible. And this made my travels richer, deeper, and much safer. This experience, however difficult it may have been, transformed me. And now, as I share this story, I hope it will also transform the way you travel, because experiencing the world is incredible, but living consciously is even better. The dish that almost knocked me over. The smell arrived before the cart, so strong it seemed to pierce the air like an aromatic wall. I was already used to Indian spices, but this one was different, dense, spicy, and mysterious. The crowd around indicated it was something famous, perhaps even iconic. Even with apprehension, I approached, because it is precisely in these moments that true discovery is born. And I didn't yet know that I was about to face my greatest gastronomic challenge of the day. The vendor smiled as if he already knew the tourist was going to suffer. He pointed to the bubbling dish, an intense red mixture where undefined pieces floated like culinary enigmas. Tourists around me recorded videos while trying it, and some laughed, already sweating from just the first bite. I knew I had embarked on an adventure from which there was no turning back. I picked up the dish, took a deep breath, and accepted my fate. The first bite was a shock. The flavor was explosive, as if each spice had already held a meeting to decide where to attack. My tongue burned, my throat heated up, and my eyes instantly began to tear up. The food was good, very good, but aggressive, and now I had to decide whether to continue or give up. But I didn't come all the way to India to back down at the most intense part of the journey. On the third bite, I felt my body react in a strange way. Chills, heat, that feeling of, whoa, something's wrong. I tried to keep my composure. After all, I was filming, and nobody wants to look defeated by a street food meal in front of the cameras. But the truth is, my body sounded a small internal alarm. Something there was pushing me beyond my limit. The vendor laughed and offered me water, which of course only made the burning sensation worse. The crowd around me started cheering, as if it were an impromptu reality show. My adrenaline surged, but I already knew I needed to stop before the experience turned into a problem. I took a deep breath, thanked the street chef, and moved on, carrying with me the memory of a delicious and almost deadly dish. The unexpected effects walking through the fair, I began to realize that my stomach wasn't reacting very well to the previous adventure. It felt like an internal heat, as if I had swallowed a small active volcano. But the video was still in progress, and giving up wasn't part of my plan. I took a deep breath and decided to continue, hoping it was just a passing discomfort. It was the price to pay for gastronomic curiosity. While exploring new stalls, I tried to focus on my surroundings to distract my mind. The organized chaos of India is something that can't be explained, only felt. The colors, the sounds, the vendors calling out, everything creates a natural spectacle that makes you forget any discomfort. At least for a few minutes, I managed to overcome the unease, letting myself be carried away by the vibrant atmosphere. But then, suddenly, my stomach gave a stronger warning, that universal warning that needs no translation in any country on the planet. I stopped. I took a deep breath. I seriously considered whether I should stop recording, but I also thought about the audience, the people who were following the experience, how authentic this journey needed to be. So I decided I would show everything, the beauty, the risk, and the real behind-the-scenes of street food. I moved closer to some shade, trying to alleviate the heat rising through my body. Sweat was already pouring down and my heart was beating faster than normal. It was strange, because part of me found it funny. After all, who almost gets sick eating a famous dish? But another part knew I needed to take care of myself. India is too intense to underestimate. After a few minutes of stillness, I felt the situation stabilize a bit. I took a sip of water, this time ice cold and welcome, and decided to return to the video with complete transparency. An outsider might think it was an exaggeration, but when you mix powerful spices with local bacteria, the result can be unpredictable, and it was no different for me. A pleasant surprise amidst the chaos. After the scare, I needed to find something lighter to balance my body. I walked to an area where vendors offered typical desserts. They were small carts overflowing with colors, textures, and sweet aromas. Just looking at them made my stomach seem to breathe a sigh of relief. It was exactly what I needed at that moment, a gastronomic truce, and perhaps a happy ending for my suffering palate. I chose a dessert called jalebi fried dough dipped in sugar syrup, crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, and absurdly sweet. It was impossible to eat without making a face of surprise. It was like biting into a sugary ray of sunshine. With each bite, I felt my body calm down a little more. Finally, a breather after so much burning in my mouth and turbulence in my stomach. While I was savoring the dessert, a smiling lady approached and offered me a second one, jalebi, on the house. She said something in Hindi, but her gesture was universal, generosity. And at that moment, that gesture was worth more than any strong spice or famous dish. It was as if all of India was telling me, "Calm down, traveler, sweetness exists here too." The emotion hit me hard, not just because of the candy itself, but because of the simplicity of that moment. In the midst of the chaos of the fair, someone decided to make my experience a little lighter. And I, who minutes before was on the verge of collapse, now smiled like a child at the sight of an unexpected gift. That's how travel is. It tests you and rewards you with equal intensity. With a more balanced body and a warm heart, I realized that the experience was about much more than just food. It was about culture, about humanity, about learning, and that completely transformed my perspective on the journey. India wasn't just a country of strong flavors. It was a country of intense emotions. and a final warning for anyone who tries this. At the end of the day, I sat in a quieter corner to reflect on everything I had experienced. From the overwhelming flavor to the near gastronomic disaster to the dessert that saved my stomach, each moment seemed part of a script written by destiny itself. And I knew I needed to share this truthfully with whoever was watching, because that's what traveling is, experiencing the unexpected. I told the camera that yes, eating street food in India is a unique experience, but it also requires caution. Not every stomach can handle the level of spices and intensity of the local dishes, and yet it's worth every second, every bite, every drop of sweat, because the culture is there, pulsating in every stall. And ignoring that would be missing the best part of the trip. I took the opportunity to warn, if you're going to try it, take it easy. Start with lighter dishes, observe the hygiene of the places, and always bring water. The experience is wonderful, but it should be enjoyed responsibly. And, above all, with respect for the local culture. The Indian street is a living stage full of surprises, and not all of them are predictable. I made it clear that, despite the scare, I would do it all again. Because it's precisely these moments that create memorable stories. Moments you tell, relive, learn from. And I knew that those watching would also feel this energy, this mixture of fear and enchantment that only India is capable of provoking. It was impossible not to fall in love with this enchanting chaos. If you enjoyed this adventure and want to follow more trips around the world, subscribe to the channel, like, and share the video. Your support is extremely important and allows me to continue experiencing these moments to show you everything. Until next time.